All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming today. We're here today with Michael Sodini and Jake You screwed me up. We were just right before this. He was telling me how to say his last name, and I'm just gonna say it wrong. Jake Wis. Wait, say it again. This
Wiskerchen.
Wiskerchen. Jake Wiskerchen. No, I see. I can't even do it. See,
What is wrong with you?
my brain is broken right now. Wiskerchen. Did
I
I
hope
get
this
it?
is a free podcast because
Of
this
course
is
it
not
is.
worth any money that anybody pay for it.
Well, entertainment value. That's what this is all about.
That's true. That's true.
Well, I'm with here. I appreciate these guys coming. We're gonna play with their perspectives, and I told them coming in, I have no idea what their perspective is, and I'm kind of excited to know what their intersection of guns and mental health, what that means, and to give you guys kind of my thoughts on this. So, just usually hand it over to I'll give it to you, Mike, just to introduce yourself, who you are, what you're about.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. My name is Michael Sodini. I created Walk the Talk America in 2018, but before that, I was a third generation firearms industry professional. So I came up through nepotism. I wasn't necessarily a person who was into firearms. I grew up with a single mom in San Francisco and New Jersey, two of the worst places you could actually grow up if you're into shooting sports or firearms, like where I came from. We didn't hunt. We didn't go shooting for recreation. It wasn't something that was part of my lifestyle. But being that I went to go work for my family after I graduated college, it's something that I got thrown into. And what we're going to talk about today is how the evolution of how it came about. Where we're doing this work in this space from the firearms industry, tackling all negative outcomes of firearms, right? So you think of gun violence, the term gun violence, there's pockets in there. And we, as the firearms industry, are coming with a solution for each one of those with our unique spin on it. And then I'm going to kick it down to Jake because he's played a tremendous role in the success of Walk the Talk America and some of our programs. So.
Ryan, first of all, thank you for having us. Joking aside about last name pronunciation and all that, it can be a courageous feat to endeavor this conversation, right? So, a lot of people in our profession shy away from it because they just don't know much. And part of what we try to do is to create a cultural competence, if you will, an understanding of what firearms culture is all about. And we're very specific to say it is not a monolith. It is not an avatar that you might think of, the bearded, gray-haired guy from, with a belly hanging over his belt, wearing fatigues. It's very, very diverse. So my role, I entered into this in 2019. So Mike say started in 2018, early spring of 2019. I got a text from a friend of mine who happens to manage and run our local premier range and retail store. It's an indoor range called Reno Guns and Range, and his name's Jordan. Jordan texted me. I've known Jordan for many, many years. He said, "Hey, have you heard of Walk the Talk America?" Because Jordan and I had previously talked about how we could combine my profession with his profession. We just
Okay.
were coming up with dead ends. So I looked up, them, and I'll put them in air quotes for the listening audience who can't see me. And them turned out to be Mike running basically a one-man show with a pretty impressive board of directors. And I reached out to them and asked if one of them would like to be on my podcast, Noggin Notes, which Ryan, you've been on.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike graciously responded very rapidly, by the way. And so we did
Two
the show.
seconds.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We did the show for about an hour and a half, but then we stayed on the phone for another approximately hour and a half, talking about all the ways that this could become something really, really cool. Because I, as a concealed carrying lifetime gun owner, raised in a family full of cops and a bunch of military, friends and family members, I was like, this is a big deal. Like we're suicide prevention at our core. But I said, we need to get upstream from this because I realized that I was self-censoring in my own professional circles by not letting people know that I was a gun owner because I was ashamed of it. I was cowed into not talking about it for fear of being lumped into the evil bad guys with guns who, we hear this in our circles. And so at the time, I happened to be chairing my licensing board here in the state of Nevada, and that had put me in touch with other licensing board entities and the behavioral health professionals around them. And I thought, what we ought to do to fix this is to create a course that brings practitioners to the range and exposes them to what firearms ownership is really all about and all the diversity that comes with it. So in a matter of weeks, we had our first cultural competence, we call it, course, and we did it at Reno Guns and Range. They hosted us, and we had, I don't know, 14 people or something show up, and it was pretty successful. A little clunky because we didn't really know what we were doing. We're
Mhm.
basically, inventing something
Yeah,
brand
figuring it
new.
out.
Yeah, and it went off well. We decided to do another one in December, I think, and that one went pretty well too. And along the way, there were various other events that occurred, and I met some new friends in the firearms community who I now am proud to call friends. Um, and the December one went pretty well, so well that we had one scheduled for March in Vegas. That would have been March of 2020, and unfortunately, the world ended,
Mm.
so we didn't get to do that one. But what it afforded us the opportunity to do is pivot to online. So we partnered with the University of Nevada. They have a program called CASAT, and it's an acronym that stands for Center for the Application of Substance Abuse Technologies. But they don't just do substance abuse; they do lots of continuing education. They hosted our first online course, and we got like 70 something people enrolled. We're like, wow, we might find something. We might have found something here. So we did it again a couple months later, and there was like 200 and something enrolled. We're like, man, we're really on to something. So that's one side of it. Is we want to train up practitioners to be more aware of what their language is, how to handle firearms owners when they come into the clinic and not chase them off with clumsy, fumbling, judgmental, awkward language. But then the flip side of that coin is to introduce what counseling and psychotherapy is to the firearms community so that they're not afraid to come in thinking that we're going to pick up the bat phone to the government and tattle on them and steal their property. So that's the origin story, if you will. There's a lot of really cool programs that Mike has developed and I've developed along the way that we can get into, but that's the
So
overview.
I just want to make sure I have this straight. So it's almost like a two-prong approach. One, to educate the practitioners, let's say like myself, who has. It was interesting that
Mhm.
you said this of the shame of gun ownership. I was having this thought. So I'm a gun owner, and I was having this thought before this conversation. Is I've never said this publicly because there just hasn't been a reason for me to state this publicly. But I had the exact same thought of like, should I say this? Like, what happens if I say this? And is there going to be judgment based on like everything that comes around with that? But so it's training both the practitioners, but also then gun owners for. Because I think you said essentially this is suicide prevention. Is what your guys' idea with the motivating drive behind all of this?
Yeah, we want to
Yeah.
try to get upstream from it. Michael tell the story, but my whole point is to like get out of the crisis intervention, moment of crisis intervention. The what do they call it? The safe talk and the assist trainings and all that stuff. I want to teach people how to stay well,
Okay.
and that starts with the firearms community. Mike can jump off from here and tell that origin story as well.
Yeah. So, by the way, the story of me responding to Jake so quick and being excited to be on his podcast, it was literally because for a whole year, I could get into the echo chamber. Like I was on every gun podcast, I
Okay.
was on every gun radio show, and I kept waiting to break through to what some would consider the other side, right?
Mm.
And I never was invited to anything. So the first time, like he contacts me, he's like, "I have this show called Naga Notes," and I look at it real fast, and I'm like, "Oh, this is somebody from the mental health side wants to
Mhm.
talk to me, right?" Like
Yeah.
that was like a big money. So that's why I rushed because I was like, "Absolutely, let's do it right now," like that type of deal. But so
Hold on. There's something
not
there though that's worth pointing out, and it reflects on Ryan's statement. I forgot until years later when you reminded me that when we started that show, I had said to you pre-show, I said, "Hey, we could talk all about your organization, but I want to talk about how I'm a gun
Mm.
owner." Right? I'd
yeah.
forgotten that I did that. So even at that time, I was skittish about doing it. Turns out I had a reason for that because not everybody was super warm and welcoming, and I had to convince some of these licensing boards to certify it as a continuing ed course because they themselves went, I don't know, this deals with guns. And I said, well, and then I started spitting statistics at it. I said, there's a Pew Research survey that suggests that 47, 42, whatever it is, percent of Americans either live with a gun or own one themselves. Can we afford to be willfully ignorant of half of our clientele? And it was like, you could see the, the mask just dropped, and they're like, yeah, okay, good point.
Well, and that's always been like that idea has always been some of my thought process. And one of the reasons I was actually really excited to talk to you guys is the whole gun control argument, whether it knows whatever side you fall into. It seems like I'm a very much like let's deal with reality, and the reality is like they're here and they exist. And so if I can do something pragmatically in this moment to make things better, rather than thinking this like utopian vision of we somehow get all the guns, like it's just not happening. So how do we deal with like the reality that is confronting us in the moment, which is as you mentioned 42% of people. That's a lot. It's a lot of people with guns. And what do we do given that reality? I think it's really interesting to lean into that. I also think it's really interesting to get pushback that you like don't look at this. Don't do that.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's when I
And
first
Mike.
got into when I first got into the industry, that was one of the things that I kind of notice is people not having a real understanding of how many firearms are actually out there, because I didn't have that understanding. And then so every time I do a public speaking event and I am talking to a crowd that may be center left or gun neutral all the way to anti-gun, I always tell them, like, I came into the industry knowing nothing.
Mhm.
And I remember the first time sitting with my grandfather, because we owned a big importer, but we were one of the smaller lines. And I said, how many guns do we import a year? And like literally when he gave me the numbers, and then I took over the company later on, knowing that a small guy does 60 to 80,000 guns, right? 60 to 80,000 guns alone, no military, no law enforcement
Mhm.
contracts. Then you start thinking about, what does Ruger do? What does Smith and Wesson do? What does Glock do? What does SIG do? Like, it's almost a miracle we don't have a bigger gun issue in the United
It
States
is.
than we do, if you
Yeah,
think about the
totally.
sheer
Yep.
numbers. Yeah. I mean, we are a polite society. Like, it's amazing.
I will say too, Ryan, before Mike tells the real story of why he formed this and left his family's company, is we have the cultural competence training. It's 3.5 hours long. If you take it, you take the quiz, it'll spit you out a certificate. Usually that's good at most licensing boards, because if one authorizes it, they all recognize it. And we go over culture, obviously. We go over basics of firearms. So it's like Firearms 101. One of our board members, who's an international firearms instructor, his name's Rob Pincus. He does a wonderful breakdown of all platforms of firearms, calibers, rounds, that kind of thing. And then I talk about counseling, and we talk about what counseling is, and the framework through which we operate, the medical model, whatnot, and ethics thereto pertaining. But one of the things I say is that we do have to meet this issue where it is, not where it could be someday, not where it is somewhere else in the
Mhm.
world, but right where it is. And that number has increased since 2020. We've seen more gun owners from more broad demographics than ever before,
Hmm.
and I've got to believe that it's probably, I know we've got like roughly 110 million gun owners in America, and America has like 340 million people.
Yeah.
So you're talking a third of people plus all their family members and live in residential dwellers. So it is a large number. And it doesn't matter where you stand on the political
Hmm.
continuum. What matters is that we have a whole bunch more people with access to these things, and we need to know whether or not they're adequately trained. And one of the things we talk about in the clinical setting is, if you're dealing with somebody with firearms, it doesn't matter if they're suicidal. They could have an angsty teenager, right, or just children at all in the home, or an elderly person who's maybe you need to start taking the guns away because they're losing it, right?
Mhm.
Same we do with car access. We try to redefine safety with firearms to responsibility, and we say, how are you storing your guns? Are you storing them responsibly? And responsible storage is defined as preventing unauthorized access. So unauthorized access is anybody who shouldn't be around a firearm, and maybe that person is you in a time of mental deterioration, whether it's temporary because you're having a bad time, or if it's somewhat permanent because you got cognitive um, disorders that are deteriorating. So that's one of the things we try to push, is to have a reasonable conversation with people. Don't ask if they have guns, just presume that they do, because half of America probably does. And say, how are your guns stored? And if they say, well, I don't own guns, okay, the conversation moves along.
Mhm.
But if they say, oh, well, let's talk about that. Who's got access? Where are they locked up?
That's such an interesting thought, because I'm thinking back to like my training on suicide, and doing, like, if you're working with someone, they're expressing some type of suicidal ideation. People will often ask about weapons, but there's a level of skittishness, especially depending on probably where you live in this country. That, like, where I live right outside of Washington D.C. Not a ton of gun ownership, and in this space, where I don't know if I would even think of asking that question in my demographic that I'm in, despite them probably owning it. And this emphasizing that this is almost like a normal thing, like we would ask about anything else in someone's life, as opposed to this taboo subject. They're like, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say this or ask this question.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
And you can learn more with the trainings. I mean, they're for free online. The parts one and parts two are downloadable and playable on our website. So I want Mike to tell his story
Yeah,
about
go
why
for it.
this even came into be, though.
Yeah. So, being the fact that I just like grew up how I did and kind of got through into the gun thing, I actually worked to my advantage for what I do today, right? Because I do understand now, like, the communication breakdown and why people, sometimes I'll see gun people talking to non-gun people, and I'm like, I wonder why they said it that way. They could have explained it in a way that could have connected to that person a little bit better. And then also validating whoever has a negative feeling about a firearm, right? Like I always like to validate people's feelings. Like I get it. You say you hate guns. You don't really hate guns. You hate people dying. You hate people being hurt, right? The gun is just where convenience meets effectiveness when it comes to things like suicide.
Mhm.
It's a tool, right? So, kind of establishing that, but coming up, observing like how we handle the negative outcomes of firearms. Like one of the things that I hear from the outsiders would be like, "Hey, all they care about is mass shootings, and they're cheering when there's a mass shooting." And I'd be at gun shows, like national gun shows, and it was the complete opposite. Like
Mhm.
I saw gun executives literally like distraught and upset. So I'm getting like information from people how they say we're acting and then watching how we're acting.
Mhm.
And it was completely different. But one of the things that I noticed every year, we have a booth at SHOT Show, which is our national show that we have every year in Vegas. And then we have a booth at the NRA show, which is a huge show, it jumps across the United States. The way that we used to set up our booth was very welcoming for people to come hang out because we had these big couches and things like that.
Okay.
And it seemed like every year we would lose one person. Like it would be like, that's weird. Dave's not here. And then someone would be like, "Oh, you didn't hear? Like Dave took his own life
Mm.
last year." And it was obviously with a firearm, but we just didn't talk about it as an industry. As we didn't talk about these negative outcomes, not because we didn't care about them, but it's because those are the things that are used against us.
Sure.
So we've developed this sort of fear. Well, the president of my company at the time, um, he wasn't. He was from the computer industry that came over as well. So he didn't grow up with guns. You know, two guys growing up in New Jersey, like guns are just not a thing in certain parts where we were.
Mhm.
And we used to talk about that. We used to talk about like, hey, it's weird how like there's so much suicide that goes on within the industry amongst our first responders, combat vets, and active duty military, but we don't talk about it. And I always equate it to like that movie Twister, because I'm gonna date myself here, but remember the F5
Oh
tornado?
yeah.
Like, yeah, we don't talk about an F5, right? We don't talk about suicide. And I remember we had a mutual friend who took her life, not by a firearm. And I remember the president of my company is a dear friend of mine. His name is Bill. Like we were very upset about it. And he told me, he goes, "Mike, suicide is the coward's way out of anything." So here I am, like going through life, being like, I don't have to worry about Bill ever taking his own life. He's pretty adamant. It's a coward's way out, and Bill's
Mhm.
not a coward. You know what I mean? So it's just one of those things you never think of. Well, in 2009, Bill took his own life with one of our firearms. He actually went to the warehouse. He had something tragic in his world happen. Went into crisis mode, went back to his house, took his own life with one of our firearms. So now it's just hitting me super personal, right? And I had to become the president of my own company. But once again, his funeral was like a who's who of the gun industry, but we didn't write about it. We didn't, there's no blogs, nothing on the internet, no magazine coverage. And we put him in the ground and kept it moving. And that always stuck with me. It was weird. It just bothered me the way that it was handled. I wish I could go back in time and, now knowing who I am now and obviously
Mhm.
apply those things, story of life, right? But um, I wanted to do something, but I never knew what that was. So cut to 2018. I have a chance to sit down with a complete stranger, a random stranger at a dinner. And basically, the lady was sitting with two gun industry people. So it was kind of like ask all these questions, how it works, what's it like being in the firearms industry?
Mhm.
And she said, what happens during a mass shooting? I said, everybody blames us. We blame mental health, and then nothing ever happens. Right? Like it's a
Sounds
merry-go-round
about
of
right.
madness.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she was like, well, why can't you work with the mental health community on solutions? And I'm just like, well, it's problematic because a lot of their solutions won't work, quite frankly, and it's feel good legislation, all that type of stuff. She's like, well, what about the things that would work? And I never thought about it like that.
Mhm.
I never thought like, whoa, I wonder if we could work together on solutions that would have a positive impact that didn't deal with legislation. There's got to be something. So, I became obsessed with this idea, created Walk the Talk America. But the funny part about it was when I first started, I actually had more emphasis on mass shootings than I
Okay.
did suicide. It was people from behavioral health and researchers, like, that worked in epidemiology that were like, hey, you need to focus on suicide. And I'm like, wait, the anti-gun people are telling me to focus on suicide, not mass shooting. That's weird. And it's because I didn't understand that finding the next mass shooter is like literally finding a needle in a
Sure.
haystack. If you cast a wide net on suicide prevention, you might catch that mass shooter when he's at stage one and he never gets up there. But suicide prevention is where you can make a huge dent. So that's how the organization started, and that's how I got shifted over to kind of focusing on
Mhm.
suicide. But now, as we've grown, I feel like we've expanded into all different types of negative outcomes of firearms and finding solutions for both sides. And what's cool about Walk the Talk America is we don't really have a natural enemy. Like coming from the firearms industry and also representing mental health, you know, we Brady, Moms Demand Action, Everytown, even these organizations that would be considered the enemy of a firearms industry company. We have good relationships with, and they're impressed with the work we do because everything we do is innovative and out of the box. Like Jake thinking out of the box and creating this course. That was something that was no one had ever seen it before. And you know, another example is putting free and anonymous mental health screenings in the boxes of guns and getting
Mm.
companies like Ruger, who sell 1.5 million guns a year, saying, check on your mental health. Here's a screening where you can go and check yourself out for anxiety or depression or
Mhm.
substance abuse. No one, the expectation level of gun industry folks is so low that all we're going to do is say pry from my cold dead hands and not come up with solutions. And I think it's changing cultures, the way that we're viewed and the way that we see ourselves, and that's what Walk the Talk America is all about.
So, something that caught me, and it sounds like through several of these kind of stories that you just shared, is that you found, it sounds like, rather than like us versus them, which is tends to how these discussions go. It sounds like there's a common enemy in sense, and that's just like tragedy. We want to prevent these things, and trying to find common ground, I think, is often to me like the enemy of progress in most things, is because we're so busy fighting. You kind of mentioned like the gun owners don't want to admit these things, but that's ammunition for the other side to get at them, and vice versa. We don't want to have mental health. I'm assuming this is the pushback, is we don't want to have mental health courses that emphasize gun ownership, because that's enabling gun ownership, and we don't want that. And trying to find like where can we kind of come together, because I'm always, one of the reasons I started this, because I'm so shocked at how much animosity there is between people that agree on like 90% of things. And as you were kind of discussing, I don't know how much disagreement there really is in these discussions, because I think behind closed doors, people are, when someone loses their life, people are upset, people are distraught. There's no one's cheering. Like, this is a caricature, I think, of people, and to be able to get people in a room, and it sounds like the work that the two of you are doing in this organization is to bring people together just to talk to one another, to get you into this idea of cultural competency. Is like, let's get two people in a room, and rather than talking at each other, over social media or through whatever means, we're going to sit down and actually like try to figure out like where do we agree, where do we align, and how can we work together to deal with, again, what I think is just reality. I don't know when, who knows what's going to happen in the future, but that's not like we're not moving anywhere anytime soon with, what would you say, 120 million guns. Like, they're not going anywhere. So why not create something that is pragmatic? That was what I was going to ask the two of you guys. What was the pushback? Because as so far what you have presented to me as a psychotherapist, I'm like, okay, like what's the problem necessarily? I would love more tools to be better educated, to maybe, now I'm going to think about this question now when I think, I have a suicidal client. I'm probably going to think a little differently after this conversation of, oh, maybe I should ask about if they are a gun owner. That wasn't a thing in my mind that was always at the top of my mind, because it's not my life. And so, yeah, what was the pushback that you guys received?
I didn't. It's hard to quantify because it's so anecdotal, and I think that the general temperature of the therapy world is that we're programmed to believe certain things, and then we just don't change our minds. And one of those things is the best way to stop firearm deaths is get rid of firearms. So you see legislation popping up, like red flag laws are a very popular piece of legislation.
Mhm.
And for the unknowing people, red flag is it's a colloquialism, but it really refers to the blanket group of what we would call extreme risk protection orders, or ERPOs. Some call them gun violence restraining orders. That's a California term. New York has the New York Safe Act. They don't actually use a term to describe their law, but they're all the same thing for all intent and purpose. And the idea is that if a person in a time of crisis who owns firearms needs those firearms separated from him or her, a concerned family member or law enforcement can file a petition with the court to remove the firearms from the individual. Now, on the surface, to the unknowing person, it sounds like a good idea, but then you start looking at the downstream sequelae of what that actually involves. It involves deputies knocking on the door of this unstable person with guns, asking to take the guns away. You've got Fourth Amendment issues of search and seizure. You've got due process issues. Was the legislative process sufficient for that, or do you need something else? You've got the issue of potential, you know, vindictiveness of jilted ex, just wanting to get back at somebody. Well, when these first started hitting, of course, the gun community was up in arms. That's unfair. There's no due process. You're violating our Second Amendment rights, our Fourth Amendment rights, our 14th Amendment rights, and the we'll call them the gun control people who think this is a reasonable idea. They were looking at it as a stopgap between incarceration and hospitalization. It's like, well, we'll keep the person out of the hospital. We'll just take the deadly weapons away, right? As a practitioner, I go, well, if you're too unsafe to be around firearms, you're probably too unsafe to be around a whole bunch of things like medication and high places and rope and swimming pools and whatever. But we don't address those things. We just address the gun because that's feel-good legislation. It doesn't really do much. Since then, there have been some research reports that come out and suggest that maybe for every ERPO that's effectuated, you're saving, or every 16 ERPOs saves one life, something like that. You say, all right, cool. Well, but maybe that's effective. But the flip side of that is to ask, how many people are we keeping away from care due to these policies? And nobody's done research on that. We started to do some. We've run some surveys that suggest anywhere between 25% and 50% of gun owners would actively avoid seeking treatment due to the existence of these policies. And you go, well, what's the big deal about guns? Well, some of them need them for work, right? If you're a police officer, or if you're a active duty military, you need it for work. If you're a rancher, if you're just run of the mill Joe gun owner, there's the personal protection angle. If you're a domestic violence survivor and you need that gun to keep the ex away, because they're not incarcerated, and the piece of paper that is the other protection order, which is we'd say it's a restraining order or whatever, that's only as good as the paper it's written on. So some people need these firearms for a whole bunch of reasons that they just aren't interested in letting go of. And so what it ends up doing is I think it exacerbates the problem. We end up with deteriorating marriages and more abuse in the homes and more suicides because they're simply not seeking care due to what they perceive us as clinicians to be, which is somebody who can take their gun rights away.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that wasn't true when they first launched. It has since become more true. And I actually wrote an article about this in 2019. It said counselors can't take your guns away. And I gave all the list of reasons why with our ethics and whatnot. Well, now it is true in places like Colorado and New York State and Washington State. A clinician can effectuate a temporary protection, an extreme risk protection order for temporarily removing firearms. So now there is a legitimate threat, and legitimate or perceived is irrelevant. The perception is what matters.
Sure.
So some of the perception within the community and some of the quote unquote pushback is that we offer these courses, but very rarely do clinicians that need to get the information actually take them, because they're just as afraid of rubbing up against the gun community to be seen as pro-gun or pro-death or pro-suicide or whatever it is. Same way with the firearms community. Mike can speak more to this because he's been in it his whole life. They are afraid to come up against the mental health community because they think that just by touching it, they're going to be perceived as anti. So it's more of a cultural existence of the pushback rather than direct, no, this is a terrible idea. Nobody's ever actually said that. I mean, we showed up at this campus of San Jose State University, requested by Students Demand Action, and we were super welcomed because we were agnostic about it. We don't particularly favor policies because we don't think that they particularly beget good outcomes, and until we have research that says otherwise, I think it does more harm than good to keep people away from care. But they weren't like, ew, boo, gun owners, pro-gun people. We're unabashedly pro-Second Amendment, but we're not pushing that on anybody. We're just saying, hey, this is reality, this is existence. What do we want to do about it that doesn't keep people away from services? Similarly, when I go to the gun shows, or at least in the beginning when I was going to gun shows, it was like people would take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, come forward and be like, you're really a therapist and a gun owner? Like you're like the
Yeah,
werewolf that turns into a vampire or something. It's like you can be, yes,
yeah.
you can be both. It's a dialectic, not a binary. So what we found personally is that everybody's on board. Every once in a while, you get the person who's like, "Oh, that's stupid," and they're usually the
Mhm.
keyboard warriors. But in person, a lot of support, a lot of support. It's a matter of getting them to the table, though. And Mike's had great success with that lately, particularly with the research community. But he can speak more to that.
Yeah, actually, when I first started, like go back 2018, rewind 2019, the pushback mainly came from the gun side, and that was just simply them not understanding I'm one of them,
Mhm.
right? So it was like guns and mental health, like, oh, this is gun control. Like
Mhm.
this guy's like a wolf in sheep clothing. So it took a long time for me to kind of win over. I mean, some of my worst speaking engagements, and Jake, you know this, were there were times when I was like, I'm never speaking in front of gun people again. Like I'm done with it. Like uh, literally bombing,
Yeah.
in front of 3,000 people on top at the Capitol, like
Mhm.
where, automatically they assume that I'm for some sort of gun control when I'm really trying to get the firearms industry where the alcohol industry got with DUIs. Right? Nobody blames Johnny Walker when somebody gets behind the car and takes out a family. They
Mhm.
just don't.
Yeah.
They blame the person. And I'm like, we could get there too. I just feel like we as the firearms community need to start coming forward with more of our own solutions because that's the thing that drives a lot of people crazy, right? It's like, hey, there's a problem. What do you think we should do about it? And if the gun people say, well, we don't know, it's not our problem, then they go, okay, well, we'll make legislation then that we think will work. And
Mm.
then we're like, pride from a cold dead hands, Second Amendment. Like, no, we need to be able to be like, this is how we attack it, right? Like, whether it's inner city youth violence, whether it's suicide, whether it's negligence, let's come up with our own plans and programs. And that was the world of difference, I think, for maybe some of the people on in research and behavioral health. I mean, Jake knows the story. Jake's heard all these stories a million times, but like the Aspen Institute of Health, like I got asked to be the first gun person to ever be a speaker on a panel there.
Mhm.
And I remember getting off the plane and literally having like 10 different people at different times pull me aside and warn me that this crowd is very anti-gun and things could go sideways. And it was cute because they were trying to protect
Yeah.
me. Um, but so I go up there and I'm like, look, it's gonna be fine. It's always fine. And I remember the lady's like, I love your confidence. Like, go get him, Tiger. And I get up on stage and yeah, like the panelists beside me, they're all kind of on the same page, and I'm on a different one in terms of how we approach this. But we all had the common theme of saving lives and reducing negative outcomes.
Mhm.
But I remember that this one point. Um, all three of them were raving about red flag laws, and I got to stand up and literally be like, okay, I'm about to say something that's going to make this room go, what is he talking about? And I was like, we're against red flag laws. And I basically just gave the speech that Jake gave, like the reasoning,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And I said, I just want you to think about it. And so here I am the next 2 days. I had 2 days of walking around the campus, like going to see other speakers because they paid for me to be up there a whole week. And literally these people were like, hey, gun dude, because I told him in the beginning, I was like, it's okay if you hate guns. I'm still going to have a drink with you. We probably agree on 90% of the things, right? Like you said. And they're like, hey, gun dude, I, I hate guns, but you gave me something to think about. I never realized like why someone would be against a red flag law. That's really interesting. I never thought it'd be a barrier to entry for people to get help. I'm gonna think about that a little. That's all I wanted, right? Now you're
Mhm.
walking away like, oh my God, the gun guy brought something to the table. But those experiences, I think, like being able to contribute solutions made people more willing to listen to what I had to say. If I
Yeah.
didn't have my own solutions.
And it sounds like one thing that I'm thinking about this, and obviously in a broader context of just guns and mental health. But this is to me is such a pervasive problem of something that it sounds like you are able to do, and it sounds such a great success is to walk into a place that may be hostile and be open to hearing this. As I said, like as a gun owner, there are problems, and I can own this and actually take a look at this and be willing to look at my own, let's say, sides, for lack of a better term, to look and see what is actually going on. I think that is very challenging for people because we live in this culture where everyone wants to attack and critique one another rather than how do we build something together. And that's what it sounds like your guys' success is that, hey, we want to build something. Sure, we're not going to agree on 100% of the things, but where can we find some common ground and be willing to, emotions are going to be high, but willing to hear it's okay if you don't like this. It's okay. I still want to talk to you and want to engage with you in this way. And I think I'm just impressed by you guys' ability to do that because I'm sure the tensions are quite high times at times.
We have what I would say pretty healthy egos about it. We are not, the easy thing to do is just to bash, right? And to criticize and to tear down. And you and I have talked about this. And I think that the healthy egoed person is willing to be humble and hear what has to be said from a different perspective. And I think what we do is we bring that and we say, you're not going to offend me. Like I've thoroughly investigated my position on this well enough that it doesn't need vociferous defense. It doesn't need emotionality. It just needs reason and logic. And that is inviting because it reveals something about the other person. If they're not able to do that, they have to reconsider their own position. And I think that when we bring that and we offer solutions, our default position is voluntary, right? Not mandated from afar or from .gov or whatever. It's voluntary. Let's do this voluntarily. Let's separate ourselves voluntarily. Let's engage in education voluntarily. We don't need to be compelled into firearms training courses. We want to opt into firearms training courses because it's the right thing to do. So a lot of that stuff has to do with the valuing of a person's autonomy, which is one of our 5 ethical precepts in the counseling field. And if I value your autonomy, then I'm not going to make you do something. I'm going to invite you to do it. And I'm going to believe that my invitation is so welcoming and useful that you'll just take me up on it. And that's fine. So that's our position. So some of these solutions, like the free and anonymous mental health screenings, that's a voluntary opt-in. They're powered by Mental Health America. They have high fidelity. Mike's got a cute story about how he got assured that this was a good thing. The tough sell is, well, you're entering some information into a computer. Gun owners are pretty skittish about that kind of thing, being tracked, data collection, that kind of stuff. But we say, no, it's free and it's truly anonymous, and it works. If it didn't work, it wouldn't still be around. And so that's something we put in all the boxes of the products that go out of all the partners we've partnered with, the wristbands that I'm wearing, that Mike's got on his microphone, that say, take a free and anonymous mental health screening today. It's great. Arm's length, non-threatening, way to check in on yourself. I invite lots of people to do that. I've got a cool story about one of my own little girls that I was treating several years ago. She took a screening and found out, yes, indeed, she was depressed, and she told all her friends about it. And the friends were like, well, duh, we've known this. She was fighting me tooth and nail. I don't have depression. I don't have depression. I just have anxiety. Well, she broke down and took the screening and was like, whoops, I guess this neutral thing told me in a static format that I must check all the boxes. So that beget better clinical conversations in the therapy office. That was pretty cool. Some of the other solutions I'll let Mike brag about because we've come up with them, and some of them have been repurposed by other people. But that's fine. Like, again, we don't have egos about this. It'd be nice to get credit for it. It'd be nice to be given attribution for some of the things like cultural competence courses. Nobody's doing that until we did it. There's lots of stuff that we innovated, and then other people took and ran with it in their own direction. And as long as people are getting help, that's all we're about. We're really trying to work ourselves out of a job too, but the job's clearly not done as suicide rates keep rising. Mike, you want to talk about some of the other things? Kids to Kings.
Yeah, I mean, Kids to Kings is the first program directed at youth shooting sports for the underprivileged, underserved communities. This is really cool. It started 5 years ago. The person that runs it, his name's Devin Perkins. He was interviewing me for a gun podcast one day, and he said, "What are you guys doing for the Black community?" And I said, "Absolutely nothing." And he like looked at me, and I said, "Nobody needs another white hero, dude. I'm not going to go into Compton and tell kids like I understand where you're coming from because I said you should do it. Is there something you can come up with, and I'll support you?" And originally, I wanted to like set him up as his own 501c3. But when he came back to me with this idea for Kids to Kings, which I thought was brilliant, he was like, "No, just put it. I want you to do it under Walk the Talk America, right?" So we've been working together for the last 5 years on it, and basically, it's introducing firearms to a group of kids that historically have never been introduced to firearms in a healthy manner, and literally thought they did not have a place in the firearms industry, right? Whether that's true or not, maybe they didn't feel welcome, right? So we go out, we we bring these kids to this program. The program is not just handing them guns and them shooting. We have a financial literacy component.
Mhm.
We take them on field trips. We introduce them to professionals, whether it's from the firearms industry or outside of the industry. But if you screw up in school, or we get a call from your mom saying that you were, mouthing off and, not behaving, you're not shooting that week. So you don't get to shoot the greatest gun that Ruger just made and sent down for you guys to enjoy.
Mhm.
And it's really cool because 2 years ago, and then next year it'll be back in Atlanta. We took the boys, and once again, this is a 5-year program, so you can come in and out of the program. We have kids that come in and out all the time. We have never had one kid come through the program and then later on have any issue with a firearm,
Mm.
which is something I'm really proud of. But we had them at the NRA show, and so I'm walking them up to booths like Ruger, telling the president of Ruger, "Come here for a second, Todd. I need you to talk to these kids." Todd uh, is talking to the kids and literally saying, like, "Hey, if you like Ruger, you want a job here one day, you can work here." Right? I go over to Glock. I see the lady who owns Glock. I said, "Hey, we have some kids that are engineers. You have an engineer here."
Mm.
Right. So the engineer comes over looking at these kids saying, "Hey, yeah, you're engineer minded. Cool." They start talking about this. "Hey, you want to come work for Glock one day? You can work for Glock." Right. JJ Rikaza, competition shooter, like you want to have your own gun shop one day. You want to be your own firearms instructor in your community. You can do it. Right. So giving these kids the opportunity, because responsible gun ownership is not just for little white hunters in Wisconsin with the orange vests. Right. It's for everybody. And like this type of program, even the center left, like when they see it and they see how these kids are coming up, these kids handle guns better than 90% of the people in the gun shows that we take them to.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
I I needed this program when I was a kid. I mean, my first time I ever shot a gun was a negligent discharge, which is a crazy story. But every kid should have some knowledge of firearms, whether you are pro gun, gun neutral, or anti gun. But like that's just another example of a program we do, and then we do all these like really cool things. Like Jake, I didn't even get a chance to talk to you about the University of California, San Francisco. I spent 2 days up there, basically role playing for med students.
Okay.
But like we have this thing called Cause a Pause, right? And it's a magnet that you can put on your gun safe where, on mine, you can't see my safe, but it's in the garage. But if you go there, it's my two daughters, right? My two
Mhm.
daughters are on the safe. And it gives somebody a chance to pause. When clinicians hear this, they're like, that's awesome. I want to
Yeah,
incorporate that. Like,
I had an emotional response to that. I'm like, oh, this is brilliant. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's just things like that if we could
Yeah.
make tools that make it easier for non-gun people to talk about these things, then we're going to do it. And that's really what it's all about.
Well,
Is like finding ways.
it's so interesting, like the introduction to this was, I grew up in an area, and the area that I'm in happens to be very left leaning. Guns are not, certainly not within the culture here, and as a kid growing up playing video games, like you have guns, you see guns on TV, and then the first time you shoot a gun, it just transforms your understanding of what this tool is. It goes from this like goofy little like laser gun looking thing in the movies to, oh, this is a really serious like power tool that I need to make sure that I'm not being dumb with. But prior to that experience, you just don't have any idea. And I'd imagine for kids, again, I can see the counterintuitive aspect of like, wait, why the hell would I want to teach kids how to use this thing? I just want them not to be around it. But to what we were saying is like, well, they're going to be around it. And is it better that they know how to do this safely, that they can utilize this and not end up shooting themselves or a friend accidentally? Or do we want to kind of, what feels like a very often society, we want to kind of cover our eyes and like, hopefully this doesn't happen and, ignore the unfortunate realities a lot of the time.
The Cosapause thing is really cool because there was a little bit of pushback from some suicide preventionists who were saying, well, if you put a picture of your family in there, what if the thing that's driving you to take your own life is you feel like you're a burden to your family? Hey, cool, don't put your family then. And I don't know. I mean, I've been in that dark space before in my life, and it's been a different motivator every time. And so my cause of pause trinket on my locking devices, I got them on all locking devices, is my Zephyr Wellness sticker and a Walk the Talk America Guns and Mental Health sticker, just like my T-shirt. And I think that if I get in that point of despondency where I'm really thinking about it and I'm actually about to open my safe, I think the thing that would stop me is that I would effectively be throwing away all the credibility that I have and the organization has if I were to follow through with that. So that's my cause of pause. So the cause of pause can be anything. It could be something you're looking forward to in the future, like
Mhm.
a degree, a graduation, job, whatever, your spouse, if you're looking to get married, whatever you think would be effective. The pause can be mechanical, the locking device, the separation of firearm and ammo. It can be mechanical for sure, physical, but it could also be psychological, and that's the whole point of the trinket or the memento. And talking about the other innovative stuff that we've done for clinicians, we have a mental health plan. It's a PDF that you can download for free from the website. You go through your patient with it or your client, and you ask a bunch of questions and you put it in place, and then they can share that with somebody, some trusted person that they can call in that time of need. Just innovative things that we don't normally think about that allows us to enter competently into a conversation. And that's another resource. It's just completely for free. We have instructor videos, so firearms instructors across the country can download our videos or our slides. They can just drop them into their slide deck, click play on the video, and we're talking about trauma mitigation or emotional functioning or whatever it may be. And their students, by and large, the reports coming back, their students just eat it up because that's the last place they expect to see such a thing. Yes, they're there for their concealed carry renewal or whatever it is, but to increasingly states are asking or mandating that the instructors put mental health, quote unquote, content, an hour's worth, 2 hours worth into their programming. They're like, I'm a gun guy. What do I know about mental health? So we just provide that for them,
Mm.
and they can just drag and drop and plug and play. And then to your point about the first time experience, that's part 3 of the course.
Oh,
That's like
okay.
the lollipop at the end of the doctor visit. So you do the academic stuff,
Mhm.
parts 1 and 2, and then we'll hold a course at a range. It'll be another 3 hours. We'll go through the mechanics. It'll be hands-on, and we're presuming people don't know anything about this, and we'll take them from small caliber to high caliber, and they'll get to shoot and get the experience of what that's like, so they truly understand hands-on. And this is really useful for people like dispatchers or, excuse me, community crisis workers who maybe show up at a house where there's some tension going on and there's firearms present. They can competently walk through the disassembly of the firearm or the disarmament thereof and not be intimidated or afraid or just simply ignorant. You can say, all right, hey, I'm on the phone with this guy. It's a blind call, crisis line. He's got a gun. What kind of gun is it? Well, it's a striker fire pistol. Okay, can you lock that slide back, please? Eject the round that's in there, drop the magazine, set it aside. Right? You can walk them through if you know what you're talking about.
Mhm.
If you don't know what you're talking about, it's just more crisis, right? So that's a lot of the stuff that we introduce in the coursework. If people are interested in taking it, we'll be happy to try to structure something, fly out. Maybe we have an instructor in the area who can do it himself or herself. It's really great.
Yeah, I love that one of the things that you're doing is the use of cultural competence in this, and seeing this as an actual culture worthy of like dignity and respect and to be taken seriously is something I don't hear very often. Where that term is usually evoked to, hey, this is a group of people who we need to take seriously because maybe we've ignored their concerns or not addressed them. And it feels like the gun community is one where it is like very much the character that I have in my head is kind of stupid. We don't really care about them. We disparage them. They just don't understand that they're dangerous and they're causing us, all this strife and all this stuff. It is. I think it's an interesting use of that term, because it absolutely is a culture. It absolutely is a part of people's lives in a way that is important and maybe fundamental. As you were mentioning, some of these people's like it's part of your job.
Yeah, and what I was impressed to learn, because even though I've been around guns my whole life, I I had the same characterization in my head, and I my first well, I went to Gun Rights Policy Conference (GRPC) in 2019 in Phoenix, and I was like, wow, there's quite a diverse group here. And then I went to SHOT. SHOT, by the way, is an acronym. It stands for Shooting, Hunting, Outdoors Trade Show. So it's a trade show,
Okay.
but it's international. And my goodness, I mean, my goodness, the level of diversity there is mind bending. Um, and the emergence of subgroups within the culture who do have their own demography is is truly staggering as well. Because as people learn that the right to own firearms, to defend self, to acquire food, is a human right, and it's not. It's something that governments try to control, but really they can't take it away. You can't take away your right to fight, right? It's like, so I'm just going to fight.
Mhm.
Um, we we are now seeing the emergence of these subgroups over the years, and it's accelerated. And we're friendly with all of them. There's Pink Pistols, there's Armed Equality, there's the Liberal Gun Club, there's Liberal Gun Owners, there's groups that break off Asian American gun owners. There's the African American Gun Club. There's sub chapters across the nation of all these things. There's Women for Gun Rights. Women and minorities are the fastest growing communities in the gun community, obviously because white men were so dominant for so long. But everybody's starting to step into this frame and really take ownership of it. And it's like, all right, well, it seems like Walk the Talk America seems to be the big tent now, and we're not, we don't have membership or anything like that. We're just a nonprofit trying to push out messaging. But they're finding a home in the connection of mental well-being and firearms. And a big part of this for clinicians to understand too is that shooting recreationally is mental wellness for so many people. Certainly the retired veterans, from the military, certain retired law enforcement, but just competition and recreation shooters like there's breath work involved. It de-anxietizes people. So the last thing I want to do with somebody who's struggling with anxiety or PTSD is to say, maybe you should separate from your guns. They're like, are you kidding me? Like, the gun is what's keeping me sane. I go to the range every week and I blow off 1,000 rounds. It sounds like a lot to people who don't understand, but that's how they reset. That's jogging or knitting or softball for other people, or it's music composition. It's shooting. And the long distance shooting, man, the amount of focus and attention paid and concentration that's required to do that, you have to block out the rest of the world. And it's very therapeutic for most people. Unfortunately, folks in our community don't talk about that much. And there's a guy named Paul Santilli, who's a military social worker, who's been trying to get this paper published on exactly that and the steps that you can take to introduce this to patients or clients. He can't find a publisher. He can't get it
Huh.
published because there's just a lot of anti-gun or gun control sentiment. Another friend, I'll let Mike talk about this, is David Yamani. He's a social psychology professor. He studies groups broadly, but he's produced a lot of really good content in his YouTube channel. It's called Light Over Heat. He wants to bring light over the heat of the argument, essentially. But he's got his own really incredible story. He's got a book called Gun Curious, and it's subtitled like A Liberal Professor's Journey into the Gun Community, or whatever the subtitle is. And he struggled to get his book published. And it's a phenomenal book. Everybody who picks it up is super supportive. But unfortunately, it seems to be like only the gun owners are in there. And he just recently published a Substack on that revelation of how, of the 5,000 copies or whatever he sold, almost all of them went to the gun community. None of them went to the academic or clinical community. So yeah, I've talked enough. I'll
So
pause now.
I just like something you said is like so intuitively like seems correct that like of course this would be a sport like any other that someone would get a ton of value, purpose, competition, all of those wonderful things that you might get out of golfing or baseball or these other things. I would have never have thought that, and I'm thinking of trying to explain that to someone in my neighborhood would be
It's
challenging. That they would be like, wait, you do this for fun? This is like there's a challenge in it. Again, I can totally. For me, it's like, well, of course, like to hit a target from 1,000 meters. Obviously, there's going to be a lot going into this, and the amount of effort and research and like it's a whole lifestyle. Then I love anything that you can get deep into competition and get better at. And why is this any different than anything else, other than obviously there's an opportunity for suicide, I think is what everyone feels. It's like, well, now I'm increasing the opportunities the more that you are around this. I think would be the, I would imagine be the pushback, but that makes so much sense that this is, you've now taken, maybe for me it would be going to the gym. If you took that away from me, my mental health will decline significantly. It's the thing that I worked hard towards, I putting the effort in, I enjoy the progression and all of the things. And for someone that's guns, I just never thought about that, but that makes so much sense.
it's
Yeah,
a
if you
martial art.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a martial art. Like you think about Chris Kyle, right? Chris Kyle was the sniper, and U.S. sniper when he got out of serving. His whole thing was taking veterans shooting. Now he lost his life doing that because of one person.
Mhm.
Like in that movie, you see Chris Kyle's journey, and then you see him die by taking somebody shooting who obviously had issues,
Yeah.
like bad issues. But I wish that movie showed the thousands of soldiers and veterans that he helped where that didn't happen. right? So when that movie came out, I was like, man, that's like that's tough. Now everyone's going to think PTSD, Marine, you're a danger to society,
Hmm.
right? Because it only shows that finality. But I think the story also needs to focus on the thousands of people that he took shooting that came out better and happy, and not for him to be remembered for that one incident where it went wrong. Because anything can go wrong anytime. I mean, you could die hanging out on a swing set at a
Sure.
playground, right? We don't say like swings are killing machines, right? Like, so,
Well,
I
and this
think
is,
people,
so I don't, there's this thing where I really like, so I'm not in the military, law enforcement, anything like this, but we need people to do those things in this world. And they're going to be a little different than who I am. So, I went into the mental health field, so I'm a little different on that. And what if those people need or have a different outlet for their things and they're not going to do knitting? They're not going to do cycling. That's just not how that they are built and organized. And other people that are not like them are going to be like, well, those people are scary marine monsters, scary things. And but again, it seems very short-sighted to me that what if this is their thing? This is how they've grown up around this. They have spent their life maybe dedicated to getting really good at this thing, and now you want to say like, let's take this away because I'm uncomfortable with it. Because yeah, sure, maybe something bad could happen. I see so much potential harm there for someone. It's like, oh, we've just taken away the one thing that you look forward to every week.
yeah, lead therapy is real, man. We call it lead therapy.
Makes
Like,
sense.
people love, people love shooting. People love talking about it. I mean, back before we had the demographic shift in gun ownership, which now, like Jake had mentioned, you look at the female population and then also to the minority pot. You like, I used to call gun shops the white man's barber shop because people would go into gun shops to just talk all day, right? Like literally not
Yeah.
buy anything, sit behind the counter and talk about guns. Now it's everybody's gun shop,
Hmm.
right? Like, it's just there's so many new people that have been introduced to shooting sports, but like this whole conversation has been based on the genie's not going back in the bottle, right? So we got to find solutions. We got to come up with things that are new, innovative to get people to understand that gun owners aren't this monolithic creature that all think the same. There's a lot more guns out there than you think they are. It's kind of like when I found out, like my mom used to let me swim in the San Francisco Bay, and I remember like seeing a documentary about how many sharks are in that bay. And I was like, you used to let me swim in there? It's like, clearly we don't have a shark problem. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? But, these things all need to be addressed. And I think we can all do it together. And there's compromise in terms of maybe not on how we view it as giving up rights, because I don't believe feel good legislation will save one more life. Or I would do it
Hmm.
if I felt it really would. But there are ways that we can solve these issues by root cause mitigation and getting to gun owners early and making them understand that guns and mental health aren't mutually exclusive. They go together, you know.
Yeah, and so kind of what you're saying, it feels like there's this desire to have this almost like utopian, this never happens, or this it's not a good enough, your guys' solution because it still happened, and that these things are efforts to make them like slightly better. Like when you mentioned this, the catch a pause, and that a family member may be something that's triggering you. It's like, well, yeah, of course, but so what? That doesn't mean this is not a pragmatically effective intervention for, let's say, 95% of people, or even 75% of people. Nothing is ever going to be 100% effective, and it is often the case where we're picking out these edge exceptions for like, why is this isn't good enough to push these things forward. And I think it's great this again, the incremental progress with just, this is reality and we have to deal with them.
Mike's got a good phrase he pulled out at some point in the recent years. It says, "Don't let data get in the way of saving a life." And I think we encounter that. I've been in enough meetings now with enough gun company executives who ask for, it's like, well, what are your data on the screenings? What do you mean, what are our data? Like, you want to know how many people took? Well, it's like how many people came back and said that they took it and it saved their life? I don't know. Like, we have tons of anecdotes. They
Sure.
certainly come through our social media and our emails and the podcast guests we've had. I there's a, a a time when we would go. So there's always after parties after these shows, and they'd be hosted by gun companies or whatever at some restaurant or whatever, and people come up and there was a series where I couldn't go to a USCCA part. USCCA was a great partner too for a long time. We don't do as much work with them as we used to, but they created a whole bunch of videos with us for what's called their Protector Academy. So they've got this whole library of online content for training, and part of it is mental wellness. I'm going to birdwalk this for a second. USCCA, the United States Concealed Carry Association, which is housed under Delta Defense. They're two companies, but they're basically the same. They're an insurance company that will provide legal assistance in the case of a defensive shooting for one of their members. So you don't have to dip into your own pocket if you get dragged into a court battle. And they're about, I don't know, 650, 700 employees, about 400 of which work on campus in Wisconsin at their headquarters. And the co-owner, co-founder, Tim Schmidt, he and his wife founded it. He's like the CEO. He had a great therapy experience with this gal named Holly Schneider. And it was so good, in fact, that she's a clinical social worker. He invited her to come on staff full time as a staff therapist at USCCA Delta Defense, and she accepted. And it was such a big hit that they invited another guy named Andrew Nett. We've worked with both these individuals; are wonderful people. Holly's got a great book called "Carry Your Own Backpack," and you could look that up. But Andrew and Holly have provided in-house therapy type services, free of insurance payment, free of copays, free of diagnostic charts, as well as programming and seminars and so forth. That it's been so successful that I saw recently they were hiring a third person to come on board. So that's the model I want to see everywhere. But back to the point, we're trying to get out to reach folks so that they do embrace these types of things, and it becomes a normalized conversation, such that we don't have to do this anymore, right? And I think what's going on is there's this emergence of people who are more willing to talk about it. They're not having to do the sidle up and whatever, because they're taking action and they're digesting this content. And anyway, at the shows, the after parties, like these USCCA parties, I couldn't go to one without coming away in full-blown tears because somebody came up and said, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here today.
Wow.
If it weren't for Walk the Talk America and the work you guys do, I saw you here, I listened to your podcast there, I realized I wasn't alone, whatever. And I don't get paid for this. I've been doing this for free for 7 years, and it's been almost a second full-time job for me. Mike gets paid barely anything. I mean, we're a real skeleton crew. So when you hear those stories and you see that kind of evidence produced, you know that it's working, and it motivates to keep moving forward, because we truly are saving lives in spite of or despite the lack of quantifiable data that a lot of people would like to have presented before they put our flyers in their box or whatever. So it's quite special, the work that we're doing.
That's incredible. I mean, I'm with you on the data thing. You don't need data for everything. You can't get data for everything. It's just impossible to do these things.
Yeah,
so
especially
it's like,
from gun owners. Gun owners are.
I'm not going to give you my information.
Yeah, you can't really let it get in the way of saving a life. And I've used that. It's so funny. I've used that at research conferences with a bunch of researchers, and actually didn't get crucified or strung up. I was like, but if you think about it, it makes sense. Like sometimes you just got to put, resources out there that people can kind of choose to use when they want to, by staying anonymous. And that's what it is. I mean, we have the anecdotal stories is all I need. I mean, we've had plenty of them where people have contacted us and said, look, I don't want you to share this, but I want you to know that Cause a Pause saved my life last night. Literally, that's enough, right? Everyone always says, if it just saves one life, it's worth it. But it's really funny how they flip off of that when it's not something that, if they don't like guns, if it just saves one life, goes right out the window. You know what I mean? But it's like, I'll hear them turn around and say it in another way, but I don't know. You gotta believe in what you're doing.
Yeah, it's a good.
I was gonna say these days we're actually, because of those anecdotal stories, they're rippling out now to communities where there's people who are in a decision-making capacity who've taken such keen interest that they're now adopting what we do and pulling it into their own industries. And one of the new industries that unfortunately is not in the video because we made it in 2021. And locking devices were just very different back then. Now we've got so many intuitive biometric phone app linked safety devices that the safety device companies are now like full steam ahead with communicating this message in conjunction with pushing their marketing for their devices. And Mike knows more about that because he's been closer to it than I have. I really think we should cover that.
Yeah, so we developed a program called Roots. It's an acronym. It stands for Responsible Ownership, Outreach, Technology, and Safety. Right. So one of the things that I noticed is in the firearms community is that we kind of ignore the safety products, and I don't want your listeners to think that's because they don't care about safety. It's literally about the business and the machine behind it, right? So the distributors don't pick up safety products because a lot of companies that create these cool safety products are one SKU products that will get lost in the millions of SKUs. Like every
Mhm.
gun company has a million SKUs. And then what I noticed is rep groups won't represent these products because it's one SKU, right? So they don't want to waste their time repping something, and they should be. I mean, I would still hold their feet to the fire, and I say this aloud in front of everybody. But what I came up with was the idea of how do we put a spotlight on some of this cool safety technology, and that's how we develop Roots. But one of the good things about Roots is not only like is it bringing attention in the firearms community about this stuff, but I take it into the research conference, right? And I
Mhm.
set up a table where I had all these devices sitting on a table. So all these researchers who have all this grant money that are always looking to study things, who only think that we only have cable locks, right, available. Because for gun owners, for your listeners that are gun owners, you know that there's a cable lock inside every box, which pretty much always goes in the garbage or never gets used, right? Because
Mhm.
cable locks have a key and you can fumble with them, and people are scared to use them in a time when they feel like they need to get to the gun fast. Um, but there's more than just regular lock boxes and cable locks. And who am I to think that the research, people, the companies, or everybody is going to like immerse themselves into firearms culture to find these things? I got to take this stuff to them.
Mhm.
I got to set up a table and be like, here's Boss Lock, here's Vera Safety, here's Gun Alert, here's Kinesium, right? Here's Regal, and show them that these products exist so that they know they're available to study, get some more data. Everyone's
Mhm.
data driven in research, and then also let you know that they're out there so you can recommend them to your patients, right? Like you can recommend them to your clients. Like, hey, you have a gun at the house, but it's super important that you have access to your firearms, but you want to prevent unauthorized access. Maybe you should try a boss lock. Let's find out what the gun owner is comfortable with trying. Um, we talked about the cable locks, like the key cable locks. Well,
Yeah.
Regal made a lock that's biometric. I
Mhm.
mean, you saw how quickly I did that, right? That's super cool. Um, so you can have a biometric lock around your gun that I've sprayed Pam on this stuff,
Mhm.
like trying to like make it fail, and it doesn't. You know what I mean? So,
Mhm.
obviously you got to make sure it's charged, but that's part of like having a plan for your safety products. You got to check we have a saying that Jake and I like to tell people. Train as hard retrieving your firearm from its locking device or storage device as you train with your firearm.
I mean, it makes
It's
sense.
possible.
It
Yeah.
just makes sense. Yeah. If you're gonna have to use
Yeah.
it, you're gonna want to know to get out of the box.
It
Yeah,
Yeah.
eliminates the
exactly.
excuse making about the person who wants to have firearms available everywhere around the house, but there's maybe kids around, right? So that's why we're trying to get away from the safe language. Are you a safe gun owner? It's like, yes, yes, I'm very safe. I have 19 staged chambered pistols everywhere in my house, so in case ISIS kicks in my window at 3 a.m., I'm ready. It's like, all right, cool, but are those stored responsibly? And it's like, well, no, they're unsecured. They don't even have holsters. They're under the couch cushions. I've got toddlers playing around. Like, okay, well,
Yeah.
slap a device on it and just know that that fingerprint's going to work.
It's
And
so
speaking
interesting.
of what you just said, Jake, real quick, because there was recently a tragedy in San Diego where two kids went to a mosque and took some lives and did something horrific, right? Which nobody wants. And it looks like it turns out the mom had given her son access to all the firearms in the house, right? I'm sure that mom literally probably had a talk with her kid one time and said, stay away from these, you know, because everyone always says, oh, I told my kid to stay away from them,
Mhm.
right? Just like I was told to stay away from
Sure.
firearms and then I had a negligent discharge, right? But like, let's look at that. So every person who's listening that might be a gun owner who's just like me and Jake, and we're just like super pro gun, that incident now will be used against us because that mom, um, she was negligent and she didn't have locking devices on her guns. And because she didn't have locking devices on her guns and she's in California, she's probably going to lose her freedom,
Mm.
her son. She already lost her son. It was suicide turned outwards. They went to that mosque, took human life, and then turned the gun on themselves. And she also could have prevented the tragic loss of those people that she didn't know that are just human beings going about their day. So when gun owners tell me like, "Oh, I don't want to lock up my guns. I don't need to," it's like, yes, you do. Every negative outcome of a firearm will be used against us. Don't contribute to that. Even if you live alone, have some sort of plan for your firearm. When you're there, go ahead, leave it by your bedside. But if you're out of the house, lock it up, because if someone breaks into your house, steals it, and then goes and does what these kids did, you're responsible for that. Like, I don't know how you walk the rest of your life not understanding that you played a part in that with the
Hmm.
butterfly effect.
Well, and I think just to probably sum it up, and one of the things that I think is there's like the actual practical things that you guys are doing, which again, I just hats off to you all for creating, doing all this, putting all this effort forward. But one thing that I'm thinking about in, again, lots of other domains is the effort that it sounds like both of you put into how to frame this issue. And it sounds like it's sometimes like silly and frustrating to talk about like what words do we use to talk about this, but it is just so important because when I hear this difference between responsible and safe, if you were to ask me like, "Hey, are you responsible?" I'm like, oh, this person's like wants me to be responsible. That's a positive thing. They're on my side. And safety, I see, is that connotation of, oh, I'm an unsafe person because I own this, and I am now, there's already starting off this kind of weird antagonism here, and just framing that you're on the side of the gun owners. You're on the side of the people that don't like guns even as well. And it's like to be able to frame this in a way that, hey, we're looking for solutions to this thing that it sounds like everyone is struggling with, and maybe in different ways, but to frame that as, hey, we're coming and driving solutions. I think that is what I'm honestly most impressed by, that to be able to navigate this. I think it's tricky because I'm sure there's pressure from both sides to speak about it in a certain way, to communicate about this, and to kind of choose your own style and way to do this. This has been very cool to learn about this on the fly.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, one of the linguistic, uh, I guess, exchanges we'd like to do also is you hear Mike saying negligent, negligent, negligent. We don't say accident. Accident attributes causality, like
Yeah.
the cosmos or something. Negligent squares it, centers it on the individual who's in charge of the item, right? So I've even taught my kids, they're 11 and almost 9 now, and so from like years ago, Ethan would reach across the table and knock over his milk or whatever. I'd be like, "What'd you do?" I negligently knocked over my milk. And so they're starting to take personal ownership in their own decision making and their behaviors and whatnot. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people will learn a lot from our courses. I can't push that heavy enough. If this happens to be a heavy therapist audience, then I would really invite people to go to the website wtta.org, walkthetalkamerica.org, and just go to the resources, classes, and toggle that and watch our videos. They're quite good, I think.
Yeah. Just anything else you guys want to plug? Where to find you guys? Things that are going on.
Yeah, I mean, you can go to social media. We're on Facebook, uh, X, Instagram. It's at Walk the Talk US. We're on LinkedIn as well. If you have any questions, reach out to any of us. We're very responsive. We love healthy debate. You don't have to agree with everything we say, but we can't get better if we don't, if we're not having these discussions, right? Like, some of the best ideas have been born uh, when I when we're talking about Walk the Talk America, from conversations where it's the person I didn't necessarily agree with, but I was like, okay, I can't give you that, but what if we did this, right?
Yeah.
Like Jake did when he created the cultural competence course. So, please give us a follow. And, hey, listen, if you have money and you really were touched today, obviously we're lean and mean, but money is not, it's not the only way you can help Walk the Talk America, right? So spread this podcast around so other people can hear it. Repost our social media, like our social media, repost all of our podcasts that we do with the Guns and Mental Health podcast. Like, there's so many different ways that people can contribute by getting the word out there, just letting people know that we exist, especially for gun owners. When you have that uncle, oh yeah, one more anecdotal
Yeah.
story. I was on a panel, a group of different organizations that all are trying to reduce gun violence in some form or fashion, and one of the ladies on there, it looked like I paid her. She was from another organization, like put in the chat in front of like the 20 organizations. She's like, Mike is the epitome of the trusted messenger for gun people. And she said, my my father is suffering from dementia, and my brother had a hard time wanting to remove his firearms. And then he came across a video of Mike and Jake talking about it. And basically changed his mind on the approach
Hmm.
with, and that, like, that's all I needed. Like that's enough for me to keep going, right? Like I was just like, okay, that's awesome. We spoke to somebody who was hesitant about talking about these things, and you know, he flipped because he felt like he had teammates and Jake and I saying it's okay, right? Like there are times when we need to do this. So anyways, I just wanted to add that before, but thank you so much for having us on. Really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
I
Yeah.
know, a pleasure, and I like to end it on this idea of you guys responsibility. I think everyone has a responsibility to do this, to improve these things by talking about it, and I think that is, what anyone could do about this is just speak up about if you're struggling with something, whether it's you're a firearm owner, if you don't like firearms, engage in the conversation with people, talk to people, get to know what the actual issues are, and like you said, maybe you're going to have an idea that might change one of the two of you guys' minds, and birth a new thing, a new product, and it doesn't happen without this because those new ideas don't come from two people that agree. There's not a whole lot. It's fun, it's nice, it's comfortable, but interesting, challenging things don't usually come out of that. So just really appreciate you guys coming on today, and it was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. And if you're a clinician listening, or if you're a firearms owner who happens to be a clinician, you like this stuff, a lot of our stuff is downloadable for free. The flyers, I'm holding a you know mental health flyer. This happens to be one that goes in the boxes. I'm showing it on screen now. The front side says, everyone struggles sometimes. Sometimes we need help. It's okay as firearms owners. We have a tough time admitting we need help. It's got a QR code to the free anonymous mental health screenings. On the flip side, it's got our partners listed. This is the gun box one, but the other one is like a range or a shop flyer that has a
Mhm.
blank space, and you could put your own company's logo on there. And if you have a good relationship with a local range or retail store, you can go in and say, "Hey, I'm doing this thing. I'm a local therapist, and I'm gun friendly. Would you mind putting these in your, on your countertop next to the,
Hmm.
the cash register or whatever?" And there's a subliminal message that this local therapy agency is aligned, and then the people who might be struggling will look and be like, "Oh, okay, well that's cool." And you're not going to go to our website and think that we're some Trojan horse, right? Like you're going to know that we're cool. And then maybe they stick that in their bag while they're waiting for the background check to come back or whatever. And later they may pull it out and use it and say, "Oh, I'm having marital issues, or my kids, acting a fool. Let's go to the local therapy shop. Which one's trustworthy? Oh, the one that I saw at my gun store." That's one way to do it. We can send you stickers in the mail too if you want to just have those out in your counter. Just put one on your water bottle, your computer, or, your car window. I have them everywhere. Again, passive, non-threatening, arm's length invitation to just check it out and move the conversation forward. But thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it, guys.